What's good, kiddos? Welcome back to the Warframe speculation series. Smash Flame asks, Origins of the Infestation. Could there be deeper connections between the Tenno and the Infestation beyond creating the Warframes? Which is followed up by Warmole, who asks, yes please, as well as the Techrot's connections to the Infested. Maybe. Alright, so this one, if we're going to speculate on the origins of the Infestation, we actually kind of need to explain the concept of soft canon. I didn't think I would be here this early. Soft canon is the idea that something is true to a setting so long as the story says nothing that directly contradicts or deconfirms the information. And soft canon can only exist in long-term properties with multiple iterations or multiple canons. And Warframe, despite existing most of its time as a pre-alpha open beta that has existed for more than a decade, coming up on a decade and a half now, did in fact have what was a soft canon prequel in the form of Dark Sector, which was going to be Warframe, but then got changed through the interference of publisher preferences and needing to stay on trend for the military shooter age of the 2000s of the aughts. Now, Dark Sector is a game that you do not need to go back to. Hayden Tenno is not technically canon, though there are references in-game to him to this day in the form of Excalibur skins, in the form of the Nightwave mission called The Old Ways, asking you to use a pistol and glaive only. And you have to bear with me that I have a little bit of saltiness that nothing has been done to actually weave the lore and the story of Dark Sector, of Lastria, and everything that happened in that game to Warframe's main story. I kind of thought we would get more of it in 1999, and I do make a cheeky little nod to the story of Dark Sector when I mention how we don't know how the Infestation got from a Lastrian submarine to Holvania, and some people in the comments section did call me out and say, nuh-uh, the Dark Sector's not canon. No, it's not. Well, it's not hard canon, it's soft canon. It hasn't been disqualified by other information, so I am free to headcanon the story of Dark Sector into Warframe all I want, because there is no contradiction and no overlap in the information presented. But if we are to accept Dark Sector as soft canon, then essentially the origins of the Technocyte Infestation is a tinkering of Eastern European Soviet bloc scientists experimenting with different biological warfare and accidentally, miraculously, you could say, depending on your definition, expanding an existing infestation of some kind, whether that was viral or biological, we don't know, some kind of microorganism, into what was an infestation that could infect both flesh and technology and unify them into a single thing. Hayden Tenno's original mission was to get into Lastria and destroy all of that stuff, but then he ended up getting infected by it instead and had to survive being left solo on a mission that started out as a failure, thus kicking off a third-person military single-player adventure game many, many years ago. The Warframe origins of finding the Infestation are way later, some unspecified, extremely long period of time later. The Infestation are discovered on a rock or a meteor somewhere around Mars that is then being experimented on by a Grineer scientist called Tengus, who accidentally or purposefully releases it in order to not be killed or to not succumb to us invading their base when we were trying to free ourselves from the Ascaris shackle that what's his name? Captain Vor put on our ankle. So in Warframe setting, the Infestation kind of already existed and just showed up one day. It was discovered rather than being invented. If we don't take the Lassrian history, the Dark Sector history as soft canon, then the Infestation have always existed in the Warframe setting, and there is no specific origin point, which would also kind of explain how we are able to see Infestation showing up in other parts of the star chart, of the system chart, even though it doesn't make sense for them to have gotten there if their introduction into the storyline was during Once Awake, was on Mars or on an asteroid in Mars that was isolated, or that they would somehow have made it elsewhere after being exploded in a bomb that didn't wipe them all out and spread across the system that way. But that isn't the actual way that the Infestation spread, because the Orokin were using all kinds of infestation. The Moon of Deimos was its own thing. Tiana Pass was its own thing. The Derelicts were their own thing. Infestation was all over the place, and there was no real successful way of containing it after they started using it, especially during the Old War, where they used it a lot to try to counteract the invasion of the Sentients. And the last solution that they came up with was the creation of the Warframes. But the use of Infestation happened during the Old War, separate from the Warframes as well, which kind of explains, for me anyway, how the Infestation broke containment. But an even deeper question to ask about what's up with the origin of the Infestation, if we're taking both the Dark Sector canon and the Warframe canon as the Infestation or its origin cells, origin species, just kind of always existed in the universe and just became more of a problem later, we have to look at the sort of hive mind awareness of the Infestation, because in the 1999 update, we now know that the Infestation is a fourth dimensional collective consciousness that maintains individuality but can see across time, has the ability to see into the void, and is aware of the man in the wall, despite the man in the wall not being terribly aware of the Infestation or not really caring or valuing the Infestation as a threat to it and its plans. Which kind of suggests that just as a biological entity, the Infestation has always existed and will always exist. So if we're talking like, what's the long-term end game for life in the Origin system or across the entire Warframe universe and galaxy, we're kind of looking at an infested ending no matter what, no matter how far the line can be pushed out of people existing on their own. Probably everything is going to be infested in the future. I see very little avenues other than for conscientious agreement between people and between specifically the Tenno and the Infestation to not do that. That could prevent the Infestation from just becoming the Borg and completely overtaking everything, every bit of matter in the universe. The Infestation are by far the most grimdark and the most serious part of Warframe's sci-fi setting, and the fact that it has been made such a subtle, it doesn't feel subtle, does it? But based on what it could be, it has been a very subtle and very background element of everything that happens in the Warframe setting. It is playing the long game, and it is staying on that long game. And the only reason we have any kind of influence over the Infestation is somehow our void powers given to us by the Man in the Wall makes us immune to being possessed by the Infestation without consent, and therefore the hive mind of the Infestation is emotionally obsessed with us because we are the one thing it cannot incorporate into itself, and yet we work so closely and intimately with it because of that close personal relationship that the Tenno and the Drifter and the Operator, they're both the Tenno, have with their Warframes. Because the Warframes are the Infestation hive mind, even though they are also able to be calmed and act separately from it thanks to our intervention. So right now, no possible way to actually decide what the origin of the infestation is. I think it's very likely that the end game for the origin system and for the Warframe universe is just infestation all the way down in every direction. I'm not really all that worried about the end game for the Man in the Wall so much as I am for everything become goo, but, you know, that's for a different story arc in the future, I guess. It's a horrible thing to think about, but it's a wonderful question to ask. So thank you, Smash Flame, for bringing that question to the series. It was a great one. Silver Sheep asks, will we get to romance Lizzie? No, never. She only has eyes for flair. Look, the rest of the infestation hive mind is all up in our grill, is so obsessive, following us around all the time. No, the Lizzie part, the Lizzie individual of the infestation, really only cares about flair. That's really settled. It's all about self-love, and the self is a lady guitar. This is known facts. Okay, moving on to your real question. Real talk, I'm kinda curious if we've already reached peak collaboration with the infestation against the Void. It's feeding us so many resources and cares for our well-being. If Deimos is a testing ground for rapid evolution, I'm sure our partitioned Helminth is... I have trouble saying that word sometimes, Helminth. I'm sure our partitioned Helminth is a wider decision as well. Is the Void already imbued without a deal? Will it finally teach Wally what love is? Is it kissable? The answer for is it kissable? Very direct, yes. We have already seen that Helminth has lips. We can go visit those lips anytime we want, and it normally eats our pets, so be careful with that. Will the infestation be the one to teach Wally what love is? Probably not. Wally seems to be entirely disinterested in the infestation, doesn't really count it as a factor. Why that is the case, who knows? It might be because of the hive mind nature of the infestation, and so perhaps Wally can't relate to or interact with the infestation's mind the way they are able to interact with the minds of regular human people and all of our human progeny, human adjacent progeny, because Wally's mind is very much created from and mimicking the structure of human minds because of Albrecht and Trotty, maybe? But as to the very first question of have we reached peak collaboration with the infestation, and is the Void already imbued into us without a deal? So that is very interesting. So the early lore for how we are channeling Void energy is with the Laura Drive, a little bit of technology in one of the Cimerus imprints that's not really important and probably not being treated as strictly necessary for how Warframe magic works. Sorry, Warframe science, but come on, you know, it's magic. But I do think you are onto something with saying that something about our relationship to the infestation is why Wally is not able to possess us in the same way he seems to be able to possess or represent other characters in the Warframe universe. He's able to represent as us to us, but he seems to not be able to represent as us to other characters the way he's able to take on the appearance of Albrecht and Trotty or Nessie Rusalka, perhaps sometimes even having their bodies. But he's even able to, you know, transform into Lloyd or things like that, representations of different characters. But I don't think we've seen, I might be wrong on this, but correct me if I am, I don't think we've seen Wally take the form of either the Drifter or the Operator in front of anyone else but ourselves. It has also been pointed out in Kim dialogues that we are resistant to being infested or that we are unable to be infested, and that seems to be the result of us having some kind of void power or connection to Wally. But in that same token, I don't think it's terribly much of a stretch to say that the reason we can't be influenced by Wally in the same way as others is because we have this fourth dimensional relationship with the infestation, who we know through Eleanor's dialogue and through Lizzie's dialogue that the infestation can access the void, can project into potential realities, not just look at different points on the existing timeline. And so if we're talking about probable or potential realities, that's void energy, and the infestation is connected to that in some way, or has some access to using it. So I think the partnership between us and the infestation, and the partnership between us and Wally, is this volleying, a competition, pulling us in one direction and another, and neither of them has complete sway. Or at least that would be what I predict the relationship between us, the infestation, and Wally is. Or at least that would be my guess as to what that relationship is doing, if in fact it has any bearing on the situation. It's also possible that the way the void works is that the deal was never actually necessary to gain void power at all, or that once we received the power, it doesn't become necessary to continue having influence from the Man in the Wall, or have the Man in the Wall involved in it at all. The Man in the Wall does not seem to have complete control over all void energy. He's not an embodiment of all the void energy that exists. He's another extremely powerful actor or entity within the void, but he is just one of many. We, the Tenno, are the many. The Drifter is another part of us that has control over the void that isn't tied to the deal with Wally, or at least from my reading of the Old War and the Debiri Paradox, the ability to create time spirals seems entirely separate from the deal. Because my theory about the Drifter is that the Drifter never took the deal, but other people don't agree with me on that point, and that's fine. I don't think it will ever be settled, and I don't think it ever needs to be. But I think the Infestation are also another actor that have access to void energy, to using that for potentiation. So, for example, if we're talking about the rapid evolution thing on Deimos, well, inside the Deimos labs, right, so we know that the veil between the void and the real universe is very thin on Deimos because of the Sanctum Anatomica. We know that there is a lot of rapid evolution experiments that ran completely out of control and went off on its own direction, creating the moon of Deimos. Thank you, Belric and Rania, for doing that, by the way. But if we want to really get into unnecessary detail about how evolution works, evolution is the result of random chance through the combination of different chemical processes during reproduction, causing mutations that are either maladaptive or adaptive to the environment that they happen to be in. So, in a way, you could think of evolution as the same kind of quantum probability as popping open a relic, the same kind of quantum probability as popping over a void relic. And if the Infestation are able to tap into the energy of the void, and were rapidly evolving through the potentiality, the probability powers, the quantum mechanics nonsense that happens because of void energy in that process, then I think it would be safe to assume that the environment of being so exposed to void energy could result in evolution that is more adept at using or surviving void energy. So yeah, I think there are a lot of potential avenues through the Infestation that we may be able to, or may already be using the void without necessarily needing access to Wally's deal. If, say, for instance, there's ever an occasion that he revokes our powers, if that's possible, we may get them back through the Infestation. But for now, we're stuck with Wally, so if we ever teach Wally what is love, chances are he's still going to hurt us a lot along the way. Thank you for your question, Silver Sheep. Thank you for watching, everyone. And now my question for you is, can you predict when the next episode of this series comes out?